Chapter 132. Speaking of the principle that the sword is life, I have learned a lot after helping the Yuezhi garrison kill enemies in the past 2 years. Zhou Xie looked coldly at Ding Ning. He gripped the other edgeless black iron sword and said, "How can a common youth like you, who has not even left Chongling and seen the wind and sand of a true battle, be worthy of teaching me?" Ding Ning looked at this youth with a bun and a sword in his hand, who gave off an iron-blooded presence. He said seriously, "I only hope that after this battle, you still have such drive. You have to understand, without defeat, there is no victory." Zhou Xie's brow suddenly furrowed. A layer of coldness flashed across his face. "You want to use words like this to disturb my mind? I fear that this is a method only gangsters use when they fight." He held his sword across his chest and expelled all the impatience in his body. Then he said coldly, "Start." As he held his sword across his chest, all the spectators on the two shores immediately focused. "Actually, this is not an absolutely fair fight." A voice sounded from a place on the slope. The speaker was a handsome youth dressed in a grand fox fur robe. Many people recognized that this handsome youth was ranked 7th on the Book of Talents, the genius of Mind Chamber sect, Exian. Then, many people recalled that Exian's father was an important person in Hanyang Academy, but no one felt there was a problem with Exian being ranked 7th on the Book of Talents, because in a trial of Mind Chamber sect last autumn, Exian had publicly displayed Realm 4 power. He was the student who had progressed the fastest in Mind Chamber sect. The Mind Chamber sect's Mind Sword was unique. Even if one was not Realm 5 and could not control flying swords, the unique Mind Sword could still allow the cultivators of Mind Chamber sect to use their mental power to form sword energy to stab or wound their opponents. The words of a person like this naturally had enough weight. You only pay attention to the ranking on the Book of Talents, but ignore that Ding Ning only started cultivating last year. While his ranking was high, the Book of Talents clearly recorded that he only had Realm 3 third-class cultivation, while Zhou Xie had Realm 3 first-class cultivation. Whether it is in terms of cultivation time or cultivation, this battle is not as fair as you think it is. Feeling the gazes of the surrounding people, Exian did not mind at all and continued, "So even if I lose, it doesn't mean anything." Many people could not help but frown, realizing that they had indeed overlooked this problem. Zhang Yi was completely convinced. He bowed to Exian from afar and said, "This person is a gentleman." Xie Changsheng pursed his lips. Although he had blind faith in Ding Ning and felt that Exian's actions were unnecessary, he also knew that Exian had good intentions. This way, even if Ding Ning lost, he would not be as embarrassed as Fang Wuk. But will Ding Ning lose? He snorted coldly. "Naturally, we don't think so," Nangong Kaishu said softly, "but most people here think the opposite." Xie Changsheng stilled slightly. When he looked at the expressions of the people around him, he immediately became angry. If he had the time, he might do something else. But Ding Ning did not give him enough time. At this time, Ding Ning on the stone platform had calmly held his sword across his chest and said, "Please." The cool voice cut through the air in front of him and passed clearly into the ears of everyone watching. In the next moment, it turned into a sharp sword hum. Ding Ning's figure did not move, but the long sword in his hand drew out more than a dozen sword marks in the air in front of him. White sword chi flowed out of the black sword, crisscrossing and instantly forming a white sword talisman in front of him. White goat sword seal manual. So fast, all the noise immediately disappeared into gasps. Chun Yi's breath caught in his throat as his eyes widened to the extreme. He recognized that this was the sword move of the White Goat Sword Seal Manual. But unlike the sword seal that had been used against him, This sword seal had turned into a large river instead of green mountains on both sides. How can he be so fast? Zhang Yi's face was filled with shock. A moment ago, he had been deeply worried that Ding Ning would not be used to this kind of unsharpened metal sword. But now, it seemed that Ding Ning had an easier time using the sword, and this blow was even faster. Zhou Xie had never thought that Ding Ning would be so decisive, and Ding Ning's sword seal would be so powerful. In his eyes, Ding Ning's figure could no longer be seen. He could only see a large river pouring over. Ding Ning was really strong. With this sword move, he was worthy of being ranked in the Book of Talents. His heart was filled with shock. As this thought flashed through his mind, a sharp whistle burst out from his mouth. His sword had originally been held horizontally in front of his chest. This was the etiquette of the Qin dynasty when fighting. But at this time, he pushed this sword horizontally in front of him. His right arm started to tremble, followed by his fingers. Boundless and pure true essence poured into the black sword at an astonishing speed, and then it turned into a dazzling yellow light. A large yellow dam seemed to appear in front of him, blocking this large river without any finesse. His vital energy cultivation was 2 minor realms higher than Ding Ning, so he did not need any finesse, and only needed to use the most reliable method to fight. Seeing him use this sword move, Luo Duofeng and Xian Jianli, who were watching from nearby Xie Changsheng and the others, had joy on their faces. In their view, if Zhou Xie was right, this battle was mostly won. There was a muffled boom. Just now, Ding Ning had purposefully used such a sword move to induce him to perform the yellow cloud/red cloud. An incomparably violent howl burst out of his mouth. The long sword in his hand slashed down with a speed that exceeded his usual limit, still too slow. Someone sighed on the riverbank. If he uses too much power now, he will not succeed. Xian also shook his head. He looked at Ding Ning with admiration in his eyes. Mas. Zhang Yi was so happy he could not finish a sentence. In the carriage, Ku Shichuan's expression suddenly became ugly. Many people did not have the same emotions as them. But in their eyes, victory was already decided. Crack! Zhou Xie's sword slashed at an ice tree that was charging at him. Countless pieces of ice flew out. He let out a furious roar as numerous ice shards smashed into his chest. He couldn't control his body at all as he retreated continuously. It was only at this moment that the rest of the spectators reacted and exclaimed in unison. Ding Ning had already attacked again. Another great river poured down towards Zhou Xie with a momentum of thousands of miles. So fast! How can he be so fast? However, Zhang Yi was able to make a complete comment on the swordsmanship. This was the fastest sword move in the White Goat Sword Seal Manual. Ding Ning's pursuit of victory was appropriate, but this sword move was one of the 3 most complicated sword seals in the White Goat Sword Seal Manual. Zhang Yi found it hard to believe that Ding Ning had used his sword like this. Hearing Zhang Yi's exclamation, Xue Wangshu smiled slightly and knocked his head with his knuckles. "You idiot! You are fast with a remnant sword. Can you not be faster with a good sword?" As if he was suddenly enlightened, Zhang Yi suddenly came to a realization. The seal scripts of the last flower remnant sword were incomplete, and the direction of the sword energy was even harder to grasp. Even though this edgeless sword was unfamiliar to Ding Ning, it was at least complete. Junior sect brother Ding Ning is a genius among geniuses to be so fast with that remnant sword. At this thought, he sank into even greater shock. Unable to control his figure, his body had suffered a heavy blow. Even if he had hurriedly attacked, his sword moves would have been disrupted. Ding Ning's attack was purely for speed. Even Lu Duofeng's face was drained of blood. He felt that Zhou Xie would undoubtedly lose. "How can I lose to you?" Yet at this time, Zhou Xie shouted angrily. His left hand's fingers touched the black sword. Like playing a musical instrument, 5 waves of vital energy furiously charged into the seal scripts from the center of the sword. A patch of ink, light, appeared in front of him. It was like an ink painting of mountains and rivers. Nangong Tsaishu's expression suddenly turned grave. She said gravely, "Painting sword move. Mountains and rivers like painting." The first move of the painting remnant scroll. Among the spectators, there were some who were more perceptive and immediately cried out the name of this sword style. When the surging river crashed into the ink light, it seemed to be fixed in the painting and could not advance at all. Using this chance, Zhou Xie's feet stomped hard. Dust sprayed out from the cracks in the stone under his body. Once again, he let out a fierce roar. His body rushed forward, holding the sword with both hands, and slashed forward. Yellow clouds spread on the sword, and then white light shone. This was the yellow cloud white crane sword essence. While this attack was hurried and not at full power, it cut straight to the center with great presence. It was more powerful than any of the previous attacks Ding Ning had used. The 2 sides of the river were completely silent. Ding Ning was just a few steps away from the edge of the river. What could he do when absolute power came at him, without any finesse? Chapter 133. Ding Ning's expression was still absolutely calm, facing this blow that came with pure power. Under everyone's shocked gazes, the sword in his hand pierced forward and then flicked upwards. The white sword chi that gushed out from the tip of the sword curved upwards in the cold air with this movement. White goat hanging horn. Many people, including Zhang Yi, stilled. No one had thought that Ding Ning would use the most ordinary move of the white goat sword manual against such a blow. Yet when he saw this move and sensed the sword essence of Ding Ning's blow, Shui Wangshu first smiled in satisfaction and then felt stunned. He found that even if he used Ding Ning's vital energy to cast this move, he could not do it more perfectly. The essence of this blow was perfect. The sword energy that curved like the white goat's horn creaked forward and finally collided with the long sword shrouded in yellow clouds and white light. To many people's shock, victory was not immediately decided. The thickest part of the white goat's horn stopped the power of Zhou Xie's blow. The soles of Ding Ning's boots made an unpleasant sound of friction against the stone surface and finally exploded. Ding Ning took 2 steps back and was only 1 step away from the edge of the stone platform behind him. Yet he stood still in the end. Ares hanging horns was the most ordinary move in the Ares sword manual, but it was also the most extraordinary move. The most important part of white goat hanging horn was not the flick of the horn, but forbearance and balance. Lowering one's head to avoid the edge, forbearance, and counterattack when the other's momentum was exhausted. Cries of surprise rang out like a tide. Zhou Xie was also in great shock. His sword move was exhausted, and he had used all the vital energy he could explode in an instant. Yet Ding Ning was still standing firmly on the stone platform. Ding Ning raised his head at this time. The long sword in his hand sank slightly, and he used all the remaining power in the sword. The white goat's horn that had appeared thin in the air also sank slightly. Just like a white sheep that was even more humble, it lowered its head even more. However, some people retracted their fists so that they could punch harder. Some people bent down and lowered their heads so that they could raise their fists more forcefully. As Ding Ning's sword sank, it slashed out. The white goat horn that was so thin it was about to disappear rose up powerfully and hit Zhou Xie's chest. Bang! A loud sound rang out, as if he had been defeated. Zhou Xie's body flew backwards like a bundle of dry wood picked up by a farmer and fell heavily into the river. Only now did the power in Ding Ning's body loosen slightly. A wave of qi spread outwards with his feet as the center. The people standing on both sides of the riverbank were shocked, speechless. Many people could not control their emotions and cried out in surprise. In the carriage, Ku Shichuan's expression was extremely dark. She was silent and thinking of something. While everyone saw that Ding Ning had not won easily, he had won. Also, Zhou Xie had comprehended a move from the painting remnant scroll. Looking at the wonders of that move, if the Hongyang Academy knew, Zhou Xie's position on the Book of Talents would be much higher. These were the thoughts of most people present. For some people with higher standards, Ding Ning had shown many more things in this battle. From beginning to end, Ding Ning had been in charge of this battle. Starting from the first sword move, Ding Ning had guided Zhou Xie's sword moves. Theoretically, Zhou Xie should have more battle experience than Ding Ning. This should not have happened, but that was exactly what happened. Also, this wine shop youth's body did not seem as weak as the rumors said. His vital energy is not enough compared to others, but his understanding and use of sword essence. After this battle, what rank will he be on the Book of Talents? Someone said in shock. Hearing this, Xin of Mind Chamber Sect smiled and said, then it will be a matter of the Hongyang Academy. The two sides of the riverbank became silent again. This was something they did not need to think about here. The Hongyang Academy would make more accurate considerations than them. Cave Master, looking at Ding Ning who was standing on the stone platform, looking at Ding Ning's slightly golden face under the morning light, Zhang Yi felt that he was also glorious. He looked joyfully at Shui Wangshu, his eyes full of desire for knowledge. Shui Wangshu knew of his puzzlement and said softly with a smile, he chose 2 sword manuals from me. One is the White Goat Sword Seal Manual, and the other is the White Goat Sword Manual. The White Goat Sword Manual is the most ordinary sword manual of White Goat Cave. Any disciple can choose to cultivate it, but since White Goat Cave was founded, it has been engraved in the secret cave for a long time. This seemingly simple sword manual naturally has its reason for existence. Hearing this, the puzzlement in Zhang Yi's eyes disappeared and turned into true admiration. Thinking of Ding Ning's white goat hanging horn, he sighed from the bottom of his heart. Junior Sect Brother Ding Ning is really extraordinary. I am not as good as Junior Sect Brother Ding Ning. Shui Wangshu laughed. He chose 2 sword manuals. One of them is the White Goat Sword Manual. I fear that when he saw the contents of this sword manual, he sensed the true meaning within. With such talent, how can you not be as good as Junior Sect Brother Ding Ning? Who in Changling can compare to him in understanding sword manuals? Why do you belittle yourself? He often says that you are soft-hearted and wishy-washy. In reality, even your sword essence has a hint of hesitation. You need to have benevolence, but it depends on who you are facing. If you add more when you should not, that is adding feet to a snake. When using the sword, the slightest mistake could lead to a huge loss. If you were to fight with someone who was weaker than you could naturally win easily. However, if you were to encounter someone who was at the same level as you, or even slightly stronger than you, how could you win if you were to hesitate? If you can really change with your talent, you can at least have a place in the Book of Talents. Hearing Shui Wangshu's long-winded words, Zhang Yi had some thoughts. He lowered his head in shame and said, "Am I not good at both being a person and using the sword?" Shui Wangshu looked at him and said seriously, "Both have problems, but it is hard to change a person's nature. I only hope that before I close my eyes, I can see you remove the hint of hesitation in your sword essence." Hearing these words, Zhang Yi was shocked. He said in a trembling voice, "This disciple will do his best." Shui Wangshu turned his head and thought, in the end, He is still lenient to use such a method to force you. Zhou Xie stood up from the ice. Ding Ning's blow was not strong enough. He was only thrown off the stone platform and rolled down the slope. He was not like Fang Wuk, who smashed a large hole in the frozen river. Yet his expression was the same as Fang Wuk's. His originally blood-red lips were now extremely bruised. How is it? Xie Changsheng would not pass on a chance to mock his opponent. He turned around and looked at Luo Duofeng and Xian Jianli, especially Xian Jianli. He said, "Just now you say you can defeat him. If you go up now, what will happen?" Xian Jianli's face was snow white. He, who was eloquent, could not speak. But Xie Changsheng was not satisfied. He looked at Xian Jianli and said in an even more disdainful tone, "Also, your vital energy cultivation is 2 minor realms higher than Ding Ning. 2 minor realms higher. This is not a fair fight, but you cannot win. Don't you feel embarrassed?" Xian Jianli was extremely ashamed and angry, but he knew that what Xie Changsheng said was a fact that no one could change. Therefore, he could only lower his head, his hands trembling uncontrollably as he endured such humiliation. Zhou Xie, who was the focus of everyone's gazes, felt even more humiliated. He bit his lips so hard they bled. Yet he did not leave immediately like Fang Wuk. He waited for Ding Ning to walk in front of him. "When do you want to enter my ink garden to see the painting remnant scroll?" He did not look at Ding Ning's face and said with a bowed head. Ding Ning said calmly, "As soon as possible." Zhou Xie was silent for a long moment and said, "Then today?" Ding Ning said, "All right." Ding Ning's voice was calm, but Zhou Xie inexplicably felt tears. He asked in a trembling voice, "Does your sword use come more from your comprehension or Shui Wangshu's notes?" Ding Ning glanced at him and said, "Many people understand, but cannot use it." He did not answer directly, but Zhou Xie understood. Being able to understand and being able to use it were 2 different things. So Ding Ning naturally relied more on his own comprehension. "What do you think?" In one of the carriages on the 2 sides of the river, Li Lingjuan's most important strategist, Lu Sish, put down the curtain and asked a white-robed youth next to him. This white-robed youth was tall and had an ordinary face. However, he had a calm aura that was neither warm nor fiery. He was Yi Haoran, ranked 2nd on the Book of Talents. Hearing Lu Sish's question, he said seriously, "If he can reach Realm 3 first class before the Min Mountain Sword Trials, I may not have the confidence to win. But if he can only reach Realm 3 second class, I should have the confidence to win." Lu Sish said calmly, "It has nothing to do with what sword manual he grasps." Yi Haoran nodded. "The vital energy difference is too great. It is the difference between a pond and a basin of water. If I can spend as I wish, I can take the lead." Lu Sish smiled slightly and said, "There is not enough time. No matter how fast his breakthrough, he can only reach Realm 3 second class at the Min Mountain Sword Trials." Yi Haoran nodded. While Ding Ning's performance today had stunned him, overall, he was not surprised by the strength of these people. Ding Ning walked across the frozen river towards Shui Wangshu, Xie Changsheng, and the others. Many gazes landed on him, filled with admiration, jealousy, and awe. But he did not have a proud expression and was still very calm. "I will immediately go to Ink Garden to see the painting remnant scroll," he said softly, bowing slightly to Shui Wangshu. Xie Changsheng suddenly grew excited and asked Zhou Xie, who was walking up the slope to return to his carriage, "Can we go see?" Zhou Xie's expression froze slightly and his mouth twitched. Was the painting remnant scroll something just anyone could read? What's more, Xie Changsheng's sarcastic remarks were truly abominable to the extreme. I know you are not willing, but I heard that Ink Garden is relatively old. If I pay to repair it, how about it? Xie Changxing's voice reached his ears. Chapter 135. The old noble families of Chongling had too many people to support, and they were used to spending. Once they declined and lost the pillar of support in the court, their decline was unimaginable. The Nie family of the past was the best example. The Nie family had once been the strongest family in Chongling under the Gongsun clan, and had once held military power in the Qin dynasty. But when they lost their power, and the strongest cultivator of the family, Nie Rang, died, the Nie family fell at an astounding speed. The families tried to sell their property. In just a few months, some of the Nie family's astounding antiques, and even items useful to cultivators, were sold, leaving only the enormous Nie garden. Even the Nie garden had been robbed. Every night, carriages would be stolen. In the end, the rare plants and trees were all stolen, and even some of the exquisite stone statues were dug up. Many of the stone and wood carvings that the great families of Chongling used as decorations came from the former Nie garden. The Zhou family of the old Chongling families had not completely disappeared like the Nie family of the past, but their situation was not good. The carriage carrying Ding Ning and the others stopped outside the Zhou family ink garden. Ding Ning and the others got off the carriage and saw the bleak surroundings. Even many of the black tiles on the walls of Ink Garden were damaged, and weeds had grown out to reveal the mud below. Their gaze passed over the tall gray walls and into Ink Garden. Some of the pavilions deep in Ink Garden were mottled in color. Much of the paint had peeled off, and some of the cracked pillars had not been replaced. Xie Changxing was young, but he had heard countless times of the past glory and luxury of Chongling's old nobility. He knew that these old nobility had been more prominent than the present marquises, especially when he saw the layout of the pavilions that seemed to fit the great path and could not be compared to the homes of the present wealthy. He sighed sincerely. It seems that tens of thousands of gold is not enough to completely repair this place. Zhou Yunhai smiled slightly and said, "If you have the mind to give more, I will not refuse." This was clearly a joke, but Xie Changxing nodded and said with a smile, "If I can gain great benefits from the painting remnant scroll, maybe my sister and father will be happy and repair the entire Ink Garden. In that case, I hope that you will have the opportunity to understand more about cultivation," Zhou Yunhai said with a smile. But inside, he said disdainfully, "A country bumpkin like you, what can you see in a day?" The ancient trees in Ink Garden provided shade. Sunlight shone through the branches and leaves, forming spots of light of various sizes on the stone path below. It was quiet and artistic. After taking a few quick steps, Zhou Xie passed Ding Ning, who had stopped. His body had become absolute black and white. He glanced at him and said coldly, "How do you know that black and white are not the original colors? How do you know that the colors you usually see are not illusions?" Ding Ning's brow imperceptibly furrowed. In reality, Zhou Xie's words were somewhat reasonable. However, Zhou Xie clearly could not understand them so deeply. He said these words to confuse Xie Changxing and confuse his thoughts. His gaze flashed. He wanted to say something but managed to stop himself. Nangong Kai Shu and the others could not remain calm. Just now, Shui Wangshu's words meant that he seemed to have seen the painting remnant scroll directly. Was it the changes in energy here were all caused by the painting remnant scroll? It was just a fragment of a scroll, but it was like a large-scale array that could cause such a change. No wonder even the most powerful people wanted to borrow the painting remnant scroll to take a look. Zhou Xie continued to move forward. With each step, a puff of black and white smoke rose from the ground. He looked like he was walking in a painting. It was unreal. A trace of pride involuntarily appeared on his clearly defined face. Even though he had entered this place countless times to comprehend, and was already familiar with every path to the point that he could walk through it with his eyes closed, every time he entered, he would still be amazed. Xie Changxing's eyes widened to their limits. Countless rivers and distant mountains appeared in front of him. The colors were appropriate, and they looked distant and vast. How could the Zhou family ink garden be so large? These were the first words that appeared in his mind. Yet when Zhou Xie, who was walking at the front, stopped, he suddenly realized. This was the painting remnant scroll. An ancient hall slowly appeared in the black and white light. The wooden ancient hall was dyed black like jade by the thick ink essence. There were no decorations inside the ancient hall. There was only a crystal wall on the stone floor at the center. This crystal wall was made up of two extremely thin pieces of crystal, and in the center of the wall was a broken scroll that was about 10 feet long and a few feet tall. Nangong Kaishu and the others were shocked speechless again. Zhou Xie was surprised. His eyebrows unconsciously rose because Ding Ning's expression was still calm. This is the painting remnant scroll of the Zhou family. You can study it yourselves, but remember not to touch the crystal wall. Otherwise, the Jinji you activate is enough to kill any cultivator below Realm 5. He said slowly. Hearing this, Xie Changxing subconsciously took 2 steps forward. The first thing he wanted to do was to see the whole picture of the scroll and see what was drawn on it. Yet when his gaze swept across the remnant scroll, his breathing immediately became disordered. Chapter 136. Ding Ning looked silently at the mountain, the clouds, and the water. He quickly frowned deeply. Metal was heavier than water. When it fell into water, it would sink to the bottom. When ordinary wood was thrown into water, it would float to the surface. Clear energy would rise into the air, and turbid energy would sink to form dust. The movement of all things had their own characteristics and laws. All kinds of primal energies of the universe made up all things in the world. Even the smallest thing would leave behind traces when it passed through the world. A careful hunter could find the footprints of a deer in the grass. An ignorant but idle child could find the traces of a snail crawling through the grass in the morning. The origin of cultivation was to investigate the laws of all things, to sense the traces left behind by the minute flows of primal energies of the universe, and comprehend the paths that could change or guide these traces. What words and pictures wanted to describe was this kind of path, but this painting remnant scroll directly abandoned words and pictures to depict this kind of path. These were different methods of expression, but compared to the words, the painting remnant scroll was like a seal, a formation. The ink lines were seal scripts that could change and guide primal energies of the universe. Most cultivation methods were connected, and many paths had their own laws. So many cultivators with high cultivation would infer many things from one example. They would comprehend the unknown paths through the laws of many cultivation diagrams and seal scripts. Even these powerful cultivators who could infer many things from one example and feel a sense of familiarity when they saw certain lines would first search for the starting brush when comprehending a scroll, like this. They would search for the first stroke of the cultivator who had left behind this scroll. When the principles were described, there would be a sequence of words. According to the narration of the cultivator who had left behind this scroll, it would be easier to understand the cultivation methods hidden within. But Ding Ning was different. Ding Ning started with essence, based on his understanding of the cultivators who had cultivated the vital energy cultivation methods of the painting remnant scroll, and from the energies he had felt when he first stepped into Ink Garden. This painting remnant scroll's understanding of vital energy cultivation was far from the 9 death silkworms. So he did not need to waste time studying the vital energy cultivation methods in the painting remnant scroll. He only needed to obtain some useful methods to fight enemies, swordsmanship, seal path. Therefore, he only needed to distinguish which of these ink stains had sword intent, which represented sword marks, and which had talisman intent that violently changed and twisted the chi of heaven and earth, which was the talisman Taoism used against the enemy. Xie Changsheng could not sense the exquisite and minute changes in energy between Ding Ning's fingers, but he finally saw several ink lines clearly, several ink lines with feeling. His breathing completely stopped. When Ding Ning's hand disappeared in front of his eyes, he instinctively narrowed his eyes, put his hand in front of him, and moved it slowly. Ding Ning walked to Zhang Yi next to him. Zhang Yi was the one with the deepest frown at this moment. "Senior sect brother, what is it that you find difficult to understand?" Ding Ning asked softly. Zhang Yi suddenly started. He seemed to realize it was Ding Ning. Then he said softly with a serious and worried frown, "I chose the simplest part to look at. The simplest part of the scroll is at the top. The lines are sparse, like several white clouds, but the faint lines of these white clouds are difficult to understand. I feel there is true meaning, but I cannot sense what it is. One day is clearly not enough time. If I have a few months, I may understand." Ding Ning looked forward calmly. He also looked at the white clouds and said seriously, "Senior sect brother, you are indeed talented and have understood, but I feel that these white clouds only have a shape. The bottom is faint, but there is water. The faint lines are flat, but they seem to have the intention of going down, as though these clouds will turn into rain." Zhang Yi's body suddenly trembled, but he did not dare to look away from the white clouds. As Ding Ning spoke, the white clouds seemed to move according to his will and then turned into rain in his eyes. Under the clear sky, it rained in Ink Garden. Looking at the concept of the pouring rain, Zhou Xie's face paled even more. He was certain that this was something no one in the Zhou family had comprehended before. He couldn't help but look at Zhang Yi and ask, "What have you comprehended?" "It should be a seal essence. It can become a sword seal or be used in forging. It is a method to fight enemies." Zhang Yi was a gentleman, so he answered Zhou Xie's question truthfully. "Junior sect brother Ding Ning." In the next moment, he looked at the calm Ding Ning and felt a mixture of emotions. Only he understood that just now his epiphany was like he had found many doors but could not enter. Then Ding Ning had kicked him into a door, and there was true meaning behind that door. "Congratulations, senior sect brother." Ding Ning looked at him and said softly, "Do not thank me. You should know that this is a coincidence. No grandmaster can see the true meaning of this painting scroll so quickly. This is just a coincidence." Zhang Yi thought back to Ding Ning's words. He felt it was reasonable. He was certain that a grandmaster like Xue Wangshu should be much weaker than the person who had left behind this painting scroll. In all of Changling, there were not many people higher in cultivation than Xue Wangshu. At this time, to his and everyone's shock, the painting remnant scroll in front of them once again released a wave of primal energies of the universe. But this wave of primal energies of the universe quickly scattered like someone had just drawn a brush, and then immediately stopped. Dang! A muffled sound came from the air in Ink Garden, like someone had struck an invisible copper bell. What is going on? Nangong Kaishu looked left and right in shock. Her and everyone else's gazes landed on Xie Changsheng, who had his hand in front of him. Xie Changsheng's expression was very strange and spectacular. "I seem to have comprehended something, but not completely, not completely," he said embarrassedly. Then he put his hand in front of his eyes and continued to look at the painting scroll. What was this? He could look at the painting remnant scroll with his hand in front of his eyes and comprehend from it. Zhou Xie thought with a stiff body. He suddenly thought of what Ding Ning had done to Xie Changsheng. He felt even more disbelief and couldn't help but turn to look at Ding Ning. "Just now, you were so focused. What do you see?" Ding Ning asked Nangong Kaishu softly. "I see a river." Nangong Kaishu looked at Ding Ning and said, "For some reason, there are many things in this painting, but I seem to only see this river." Ding Ning said calmly in a low voice, "This is normal. Everyone has different eyes, likes and dislikes. Every cultivator cultivates different things. When looking at seals or diagrams like this, there will naturally be differences." Nangong Kaishu nodded and said, "My father said something similar." This old man's gaze kept drifting outside the window as though he was terrified and disgusted by his own body. His gaze rarely touched his body. His gaze was filled with many negative emotions: hatred, unwillingness, greed, viciousness. This caused his clean face to appear slightly vicious. The sun was about to set. The bell had stopped ringing, yet several unique sword essences appeared in the cold air like swimming fish in the air above Ink Garden. Then there was another thunderous sound that rolled down from the sky. When he heard the previous bell ringing, this old man knew that something unusual was happening in Ink Garden today. When he sensed the two presences coming out of the painting remnant scroll, he no longer had any doubts. He wanted to know the true reason for this unusual event. So he stood up from the couch. The moment he stood up, all the negative and ruthless emotions in his eyes disappeared and turned into kindness. He put on a fox fur coat to cover his abdomen. He looked like an extremely kind and benevolent old man. Chapter 138. In front of the painting remnant scroll. Zhou Xie, the once proud young genius of Chongling, had an ashen face. His heart was slightly numb from the continuous attacks of energy coming from the painting scroll. Zhang Yi comprehended something and caused a heavy rain to fall in Ink Garden. Xie Changsheng comprehended something. Strange sounds exploded in the air of Ink Garden, like the ringing of an enormous bell, and echoed through the mountains. Nangong Kaishu comprehended something. Several strange sword essences suddenly appeared in the ancient hall, like fish swimming against the flow of the river, splashing and moving unpredictably. Su Hashan comprehended something. There seemed to be an invisible mountain in the sky, and enormous boulders were rolling down like thunder. They were all shocked speechless. They were still thinking back to those lines and conceptions, afraid they would forget. Only Shun Yi was ashamed. "Senior sect brother, I still cannot see anything." He turned to look at Ding Ning next to him and said softly, "I do not sense the echo of an empty valley between the two mountains, nor do I sense the boulders rolling down the mountain. I used Xie Changxing's method and saw nothing special in the ink lines. Everyone has different strengths." Ding Ning looked at the ashamed Shen Yi and said calmly, "It is your strength to see other people's strengths, but it is your fault to learn from other people's strengths. Guangzhong has 800 miles of fertile land. You are usually broad-minded and broad-minded. So you can see the big picture. You can see the color of the two mountains. You only need to look at the color of the two mountains." Shun Yi was stunned and said to himself, "What is the use of just looking at the color?" Ding Ning looked coolly at him and said, "The sun is set and the sky is dark." Shun Yi was even more stunned. He did not understand why Ding Ning would say such a thing. "When we came, the sun was high and bright, but now the sky is dark." Ding Ning continued calmly, "But look at the color of the two mountains. Has it changed?" Shun Yi's body suddenly shook. In the picture scroll in his eyes, all he could see was a black mountain and a faint white mountain. It was no different from when he first arrived. In the dark light, it was still as clear as before. The black didn't become darker, and the white was still faint, as if it was eternal. A light seemed to flash through his mind. His vision suddenly cleared, and he instinctively tried to catch the ink lines that made the black and white unchanging. His mind was immediately immersed in it. I have never heard of this before. At this moment, a kind and gentle voice sounded outside the ancient palace. I had never thought that there was a way to comprehend the painting scroll like this. I had never thought that Changling's youth would have such insight. Hearing this voice, Zhou Xie's eyes filled with awe. Thinking that it was because of him that so many outsiders had entered Ink Garden and obtained such benefits, he was filled with terror. He turned and knelt down to the person outside the ancient hall. He said in a trembling voice, "Old ancestor." A hint of coldness flashed through Ding Ning's eyes, but the moment he turned, it melted like ice and turned into calm water. He turned to look at the old man dressed in grand silver fox fur robes who had appeared at the entrance. Other than Shen Yi, who was in a wondrous state, Zhang Yi, Xie Changsheng, and the others turned in shock to look at this old man who had suddenly appeared. When Zhou Xie's voice echoed in their ears, and they saw Zhou Xie's kneeling body on the ground, Zhang Yi was the first to think of a possibility. His face was filled with disbelief, as if he had just realized something. Could you be Senior Zhou Rongmo? What? Xie Changsheng almost instinctively exclaimed. How is this possible? It did sound impossible. The Zhou family had an old ancestor called Zhou Rongmo. He was the only person who could comprehend a cultivation method from the painting remnant scroll and comprehend 3 sword moves from it. But that person had to be traced back several generations from Zhou Xie. In the era of the previous emperor of the Qin dynasty, he had been many years old. The legends said that in the bloody storm years before the Yuanwu emperor ascended the throne, this old ancestor of the Zhou family had been killed with one blow. His intestines had been pierced through, and his blood had spilled over many streets. How could a person like this still be alive? Hearing Xie Changsheng's exclamation, this benevolent and amiable old man smiled warmly and said emotionally, "Old but not dead, it is this old man." Nangong Kaishu and Su Hashan were also filled with shock. The 2 of them were descendants of generals. Compared to Zhang Yi and Xie Changsheng, they knew more of Changling's past. This was an existence that had experienced 2 generations of emperors of the Qin dynasty, the glory and decline of the old nobility, the reform, and the Yuanwu emperor's ascension. They even knew that during the reform, this old man had once been an enemy of the Yuanwu emperor. But after the Yuanwu emperor's situation was set, and in the bloody storm before his ascension, he and the Zhou family had accepted the last chance the Yuanwu emperor gave them to fight for the Yuanwu emperor. So while the Zhou family had declined, they were still able to survive in Changling and had vast lands. But the rumor said that the battle had been terrible. Forefather Zhou, like many other experts, had died with incomplete bodies. Who would have thought that this forefather Zhou was still alive in the Garden of Zhou? Forefather Zhou Rongma smiled benevolently. His gaze landed on Ding Ning. He said kindly, "Just now, I coincidentally heard your words of advice to your junior sect brother." This was an astounding answer. There had been so many cultivators in the Zhou family for generations, but no one had been able to see the crescent moon and sword essence the first time they stood in front of this remnant. Not even he could do it. He started to confirm that Ding Ning really had astounding comprehension talent. His breathing sped up uncontrollably, and burning desire and greed flowed through his eyes. This is the missing corner of the painting remnant scroll outside. Even in the era of the previous emperor, the top cultivators of the world did not have the chance to see this thing. This is something the Zhou family spent great effort and paid a great price to preserve. Since you have such a chance today, you should take a good look. Forefather Zhou exhaled some hot air and tried to speak as slowly and clearly as possible. This corner has an opportunity with me. When I first started to comprehend this painting scroll, what attracted me the most was this corner. I spent almost 100 years. At the start, I discovered that the seal lines of this crescent moon were vital energy cultivation methods. Then I discovered that the light of this crescent moon was the true path of the sword. So this crescent moon doesn't just contain a powerful sword manual, it also contains a powerful vital energy cultivation method. True pain appeared in Forefather Zhou's eyes. When comprehending the path, I naturally felt great joy. But after cultivating, I sank into true perplexity. The vital energy cultivation method and sword manual contained in this crescent moon seemed to be incomplete. I do not know if there is a problem with my comprehension or this remnant corner, because while this remnant corner was cut from the scroll outside, it is still missing a piece of the crescent moon. I do not know if there is something important missing from the crescent moon. Listening carefully to Forefather Zhou's narration, Ding Ning slowly nodded and said calmly, "Let me take a look." His state of mind became absolutely calm. His eyes fell on the simple ink lines of the crescent moon. His perception quickly spread out along with the countless faint white rays of light. His perception was limited and could not even pass through the heavy metal door. But the direction of these lines of light caused a scene high up in the sky to appear in his mind. He seemed to be standing high up in the sky and watching these lines of light pass around him. In the sky, there were dots of primal energies of the universe that most cultivators would never be able to touch in their entire lives. Many of the primal energies of the universe that flashed with white and pure light slowly gathered on these lines of light and then descended. Ding Ning frowned slightly. He understood. These lines were not a direct method to fight the enemy, but a method that cultivators used to absorb primal energies of the universe. He took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. This crescent moon is drawn in a corner, and it is so far away. So I suspect that the master who left behind this painting is most likely a woman. Her meaning is that the other parts of the painting can be comprehended and studied, but this corner is related to the cultivation of true essence, and only a woman can cultivate it. Forefather Zhou's breathing completely stopped. His body started to tremble. For a moment, there were countless sharp voices screaming in his mind at the same time. They were mocking and laughing wildly. Could it be that his entire life of cultivation was really incomparably laughable? That he had cultivated a cultivation method that only women could cultivate? His psychic power couldn't help but touch the hardened moon palace. He felt the swelling and sinking of his lower abdomen. His heart ached fiercely, but it was as if a streak of light flashed through his mind. Cold moon menstruation. Was this really so? If a woman cultivated this fiendish energy that was too oppressive, she could naturally expel it during her menstruation, and her body would be unharmed. So the true meaning of this cold moon was like this. For a moment, his breathing became extremely rapid, and the aura on his body shook chaotically, even causing the entire oppressive underground palace to hum. The entire courtyard started to tremble. The vibrating air pressed into his ear. It was very uncomfortable. Ding Ning coughed softly and covered his ears. Forefather Zhou laughed bitterly, but he was a formidable person. At a time like this, he still controlled his emotions. "Apologies." He looked at Ding Ning and said softly, "I have embarrassed myself in front of you. Thinking that my hundreds of years of comprehension may have been wrong from the start, I am so disappointed." Ding Ning bowed slightly and said, "This junior is afraid. This is just my opinion. It may not be correct. This may be built on the foundation of my many years of comprehension. This is a great possibility." Forefather Zhou bowed in return and said sorrowfully, "I comprehended the vital energy circulation method and sword formula on this when I was 100 years old. At first, It was very powerful, but after using it for a while, the Jade Palace's vital energy started to condense. I thought this was the uniqueness of this method, and I could be reborn in the future, but the situation grew worse. If I was wrong from the start, and this is a method that only women can cultivate, then what do you think can be remedied? Ding Ning's gaze imperceptibly flashed. He bowed his head and said, "If there is such a possibility as to remedy, Elder, your understanding of cultivation should surpass mine. Since it is extreme cold, in my view, I can only use extreme yang energy to counteract it." Forefather Zhou's mind settled slightly. He suddenly reflected and found that he had lost his sense of propriety. Then a thread of hope rose in his despondent heart. If he could use extreme yang energy to counteract the Jade Palace's vital energy, as long as the Jade Palace's vital energy could be used again, even if he did not use the vital energy circulation method on the diagram and did not use that kind of sword essence with his present cultivation, he feared that he could surpass his peak in the past and rise again in Changling. For extreme yang energy items to enter the energy sea, they have to merge into the 5 energies. Forefather Zhou looked at Ding Ning and said probingly, "Then there must be a spirit medicine of the universe that nourishes yang energy." Ding Ning said calmly, "I think so." Forefather Zhou was silent. Moments later, he recovered his benevolent and amiable expression. He said gently, "I will send you out now." When he turned and walked a few steps, his energy clashed with the energy on the black metal door. When the metal door opened again, his footsteps paused, and he said softly, "If you feel it is useful, I can tell you the cultivation method I comprehended from this corner. While only women can cultivate it according to what you said, it is very powerful against enemies. Also, if you do not cultivate it to a certain level, you will not need a long time, and there will be no harm. For you, it may be useful in the short term." "Are you really so kind? You didn't even let go of an unfamiliar young man who might be of help to you. You just wanted me to cultivate this kind of technique. In the end, you wanted to see if I, who was in the same situation as you, would be able to find something useful to you." Ding Ning sneered inside, but he showed shock on his face. He said in a trembling voice, "Is this really possible?" Forefather Zhou smiled slightly and said, "Ever since you entered Ink Garden, I received a report. I know that you are ranked on the ranking of talents and will attend the Min Mountain Sword trials this summer. I think that the cultivation method I comprehended from this corner of the painting remnant scroll will be of great use to you in the Min Mountain Sword trials. Of course, after I tell you later, you can consider whether to cultivate it." Ding Ning took a deep breath. Looking at the other's back, he said, "How can I repay Elder's kindness?" Forefather Zhou smiled and said, "Then when I think of something you can help with, just do your best to help me." It sounded bold and unrestrained. However, his eyes were cold and filled with ruthlessness. Night fell completely, and the sky was dotted with stars. Xie Changsheng, Zhang Yi, and the others grew anxious as they waited, especially when they did not know what had happened when the ground had trembled slightly. They could not help but worry about Ding Ning's safety. At this time, a Zhou family attendant came with a lantern. She bowed to the people in front of the painting remnant scroll and said, "My family's forefather is personally teaching Mr. Ding cultivation methods. It may take some time. Forefather has ordered a banquet to be prepared in the pavilion of Ink Garden for everyone. You can go eat first, and he will personally send Mr. Ding over. Even Forefather Zhou is going to teach him some cultivation methods." Ding Ning is really... Xie Changsheng and the others who did not understand thought that Ding Ning's talent caused Forefather Zhou to like him. They were shocked and envious. In a quiet room in the courtyard, Ding Ning sat with his eyes closed as Forefather Zhou slowly narrated. In the span of a few breaths, the meridian diagram clearly appeared in Ding Ning's mind. He used his consciousness to look inside, and the 12 meridians in his body were peeled off. In the corner of the painting remnant scroll, the key meridian points of the 12 meridians were strung together like countless silver beads. They were densely packed and resonated with the countless paths in his mind. In his perception, countless white threads of light suddenly appeared in the world around him. He opened his body and allowed these white threads of light to connect with the silver bead-like meridians in his body. The moment they connected, he sensed countless dots of primal energies of the universe slipping through these white threads of light and entering the meridians in his body. Those meridians lit up one after another like bright lamps. When all the meridians lit up, the dots of primal energies of the universe connected into one and started to flow. They turned into a cold and murderous flow that was extremely heavy like metal. After the dots of primal energies of the universe were absorbed into his 12 meridians, the cold and murderous flow grew stronger. In his perception, it started to give off a deep black. Following his thoughts, the black chi flow instantly suppressed a certain meridian point in one of the meridians. With a boom, this black flow of energy suddenly compressed and transformed into a thin black crystal that settled in that meridian. It was a thin piece of crystal, but it also looked like a small sword that was as thin as ice. It also looked like a piece of crystal rune. Chapter 141. As expected, it is the distant star fiendish energy. Once this thin black crystal formed and was embedded in the meridian point, there was a slight stabbing pain. Ding Ning's mind shifted, and he left his perception. He opened his eyes and woke up. There were countless kinds of primordial chi in the world, such as the withering and flourishing of plants, the burning of wood, wind, thunder, rain, and lightning. No one knew how much primordial chi was active among them, but the primordial chi in the human world could not be separated from the combination and change of the original primordial chi of the world. Yet in this world, there were also the energies of the sun, moon, and stars from the outside, especially the star energies that came from the distant stars. No one knew how many lightless, cold, and desolate spaces they had to pass through. The coldness and size of those spaces were unimaginable even to cultivators. The star energies that passed through the endless cold spaces and landed in this world were usually tainted with the energies of the extreme infiendish energies and were not compatible with the bodies of cultivators. However, those with great abilities were able to make use of it and comprehend the method to absorb and use the cold, fiendish star Yuan Qi. The most important corner of the painting remnant scroll recorded such a method. Ding Ning could sense that Na Hanji's fiendish energy had formed a sword. With a thought, the crystal sword that had just formed in his body would fly out like a flying sword. Although it was unable to change according to one's will like a real flying sword, it was extremely strange and unpredictable. However, because this object was condensed from the star-cold, baleful Yuan Qi, its power was extremely shocking. Coupled with the fact that it could suddenly be used against an enemy, it was extremely difficult for the enemy to guard against it. These 12 meridians could absorb and form 24 of these fiendish little swords stored in 24 meridian points. According to the true meaning of profit and loss of the moon, the correct method was to absorb these 24 little swords and then send them out according to unique seal lines. The moment the 20 meridian points were empty, they would absorb large amounts of primal energies of the universe beneficial to the cultivator's body and merge the energies. This was a method recorded in the cultivation records to absorb water, the true path of profit and loss. But Forefather Zhou's knowledge and understanding were limited. He only understood the method to fight the enemy and did not understand the true meaning of cultivation. No wonder you are the genius who set the newest cultivation record in Chongling. You can comprehend the method I told you so quickly and condense fiendish energy so quickly. The moment Ding Ning opened his eyes, Forefather Zhou sent a bit of vital energy into Ding Ning's body. When he sensed the cold little sword in that meridian point, he immediately sighed. To be able to condense such a sword, the other 23 swords are naturally not a problem. You have already grasped the true technique. You should feel that this cold little sword is harmful to your body, but it should not be a problem to maintain your body for half a year. It is enough for you to deal with the Min Mountain Sword trials. After sighing, he looked gently at Ding Ning and said, "Half a year wouldn't be a problem?" Sensing the chip that was embedded in the orifice like a real ice chip, Ding Ning was certain that it was exactly half a year ago. If he really used Forefather Zhou's erroneous methods, in half a year, the Jade Palace in his energy sea would freeze under the energy of these fiendish little swords. When he fought the enemy, his Jade Palace and Celestial Aperture would not flow smoothly, and he feared that he would only be able to use a fraction of his vital energy. That would be the start of the Min Mountain Sword trials. If he could only rely on these 24 fiendish little swords and a fraction of his cultivation to fight the enemy, he would be in a terrible state. While he thought so, Ding Ning had a sincere expression of gratitude. He bowed deeply and said, "Thank you, Forefather, for the scripture. If I need it in the future, I will do my best." They both had their own plans. Forefather Zhou's heart was dark, but he had a bright smile on his face. He said in a harmonious voice, "Little friend is too polite. With your talent, the Zhou family ink garden will be proud of you in the future." In the past, the old nobility had been extremely extravagant in food. While the Zhou family had declined, and the ingredients used were ordinary, the finesse was not something ordinary people could imagine. Even Xie Changsheng, who was used to seeing the dishes of famous chefs in big restaurants, couldn't help but feel that the pursuit of ordinary life of the rich and powerful today was still lacking in refinement and elegance compared to the old aristocratic families of the past when it came to the pursuit of ordinary life. Zhang Yi, who had been thinking about Ding Ning's fortuitous encounters, was slightly distracted when he put a piece of eggplant into his mouth and tasted the freshness of the chicken soup and shrimp juice, but could not taste the eggplant. He could not help but think eggplant was eggplant. If one wanted the freshness of the chicken and shrimp, just eat the chicken and shrimp. Why waste so much effort? Such a shallow bowl of eggplant, for ordinary Chongling farmers, would not be able to make 2 bowls of rice. But how many things would be wasted in the process of making it? One of the most important reasons why the old nobility were unable to stop the reform in the past was that they were too extravagant. The most famous story was that there was a powerful family that washed the white rice that they could not finish every day into the sewers. The monks in a nearby temple washed the white rice every day, dried it, and stored it. When the powerful family declined, the dried white rice stored in the temple was enough for a family to eat for several years. How could true nobility and loftiness be displayed with such delicacy? In his momentary days, some true nobility and loftiness unconsciously spread from his body, matching the seal lines he had comprehended from the painting remnant scroll today. The air above Ink Garden suddenly became slightly damp. "Senior sect brother, what, do you want to soak me in the rain? You are eldest sect brother, not brother great wet." At this time, a teasing voice came from outside the door. Zhang Yi shook and refocused. He found that he had accidentally touched those lines in the world again. He instinctively withdrew his presence. The moisture in the sky disappeared. At the same time, he looked at the person who had appeared at the door and exclaimed in surprise, "Junior sect brother Ding Ning, you have returned." Seeing Ding Ning appear at the door, Xie Changsheng and the others immediately became excited. Senior sect brother Ding Ning, did you comprehend something? Shun Yi was the first to speak and asked. Ding Ning nodded. Zhang Yi was stunned. He was so surprised that he was stunned. That's great. In the next moment, he said happily from the bottom of his heart. On this night, in a study deep in the Chongling Imperial Palace, there was a youth about their age sitting. His features were handsome, gentle, and natural, and he exuded generosity and benevolence. A youth of the imperial family was sitting alone in a seclusion room. The gentleness and benevolence he exuded when he revealed his true self was even more precious. Of all of the Yuanwu Emperor's imperial sons, only one had such a personality. So he was Fu Su. At this time, there was a thin booklet open in front of him. This thin booklet was the Min Mountain Sword Trials Book of Talents compiled by the Hongyang Academy. But the Book of Talents in front of him had changed compared to the one in the daytime. On this open booklet, Chun Lufeng, who had defeated Fang Wuk, was ranked 35th. Ding Ning, who had defeated Zhou Xie, had quietly risen to 61st. In just one day, the positions of many people on the Book of Talents had changed. These changes, and even the upcoming Min Mountain Sword Trials, had nothing to do with Fu Su. Some of the secret cultivation manuals in the Chongling Imperial Palace would not lose to the Min Mountain Sword sect. Also, his mother, the Empress of the Qin dynasty, and his father, the Yuanwu Emperor, were the strongest cultivators in the world. They had arranged a cultivation path for him to advance on. Even if he was interested in going to Min Mountain Sword sect to take a look with his noble status, he did not need to participate in any tests. Everything about him was something that no young genius in Chongling could envy. Yet he was very lonely, just like how he was with Ding Ning and the others right now. Many young geniuses had friends around them, but he was alone. He seemed to be alone from beginning to end, especially at the banquet at the beginning of the year when the palace attendant who usually served him disappeared into the air as though she had never existed. Even though nothing seemed to have changed, he was smart enough to sense that everyone around him was deliberately keeping a distance from him. This kind of distance did not come from disgust and speculation, but from respect and wariness towards his parents, the Empress, and the Emperor. No one was willing to cause trouble for no reason. No one was willing to turn into dust and disappear into the air. When most people who had to appear in front of him held such respect and wariness, he felt even more lonely. While the thin booklet in front of him seemed to have nothing to do with him, the changes on it made him feel lively and exciting. He wanted to have friends like normal youths and be as lively and exciting as normal youths. His gaze left the booklet, and he looked up. The square and dignified buildings outside the window looked like cold shackles. His body did not move, but his mind flew out. Perhaps I should make some changes. Otherwise, if I'm stuck in it and can't get rid of the depression, it will naturally affect the progress of my cultivation. He was talking to himself, as if he was trying to convince himself to make such a sound. A warm and sunny smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. Chapter 142. Late at night, back to the alley. Ding Ning did not return directly to the wine shop. First, he and Zhang Yi sent Shui Wangshu to the small courtyard they had rented. Shun Yi was also living in this small courtyard. While it was slightly crowded, it was lively. On the way, Shui Wangshu did not ask Ding Ning questions about cultivation. When they entered the small courtyard, Zhang Yi helped him sit down on a cushioned rattan chair. After setting up the brazier, he looked at Ding Ning and asked, "What did that old bastard of the Zhou family teach you today?" Ding Ning did not answer directly, but raised his left hand slightly. With a hiss, a black sword light charged out of the fingertip of his left hand, and instantly shattered the tip of the old pear tree in the small courtyard, which shavings flew into the air. That black sword light flew far into the night sky like a shooting star. Flying sword, Shen Yi instinctively exclaimed. But then he felt something was wrong. He felt a thick wave of coldness that seemed to freeze one's blood. He gaped and said, "What kind of move is this?" Xue Wangshu's expression grew grave. He hesitated for a long moment, and then looked at Ding Ning and asked, "Star, fiendish energy?" Ding Ning nodded. Xue Wangshu frowned slightly, and then asked, "Will it be harmful?" Ding Ning said seriously, "No." Xue Wangshu was slightly suspicious and said, "That old bastard of the Zhou family is so kind." Ding Ning bent down and whispered into his ear, "The path of profit and loss." Xue Wangshu stilled and then wanted to laugh. But then he looked at Ding Ning and warned, "You still have to be careful. That old bastard of the Zhou family is at least Realm 7 second class. Even at my peak, I am not a match for him." Star cold baleful Yuan Qi. Is this the legendary method of condensing baleful aura? Zhang Yi felt that Ding Ning and Xue Wangshu were speaking in riddles. He was slightly confused, but he could clearly hear the criticism in Xue Wangshu's words towards forefather Zhou. So he looked at Xue Wangshu and said hesitantly, "Cave Master, the Zhou family has been extremely polite to us today. Forefather Zhou is also kind and has taught junior sect brother Ding Ning. Is it not appropriate for us to be like this behind his back?" Regardless of whether it is appropriate or not, these words were said in this courtyard. If you heard it, then forget it. Don't mention it in front of anyone else. Xue Wangshu glanced at Zhang Yi and Shen Yi and said slowly and meaningfully, "Some things may never be recorded in the history books of the Qin dynasty, but old people like me have coincidentally seen or heard of them. Forefather Zhou and some powerful cultivators of the old prestigious families once kidnapped women and children to tempt others to save them. In the end, his stomach was cut open by a sword in an alley. He screamed and fled, his intestines flowing out. His blood dyed several streets. Everyone thought he was dead. At the time, many cultivators felt that he deserved to die like that. For cultivators, especially cultivators of Chongling, using women and children to force the enemy is a very shameless thing. I always think that everyone has a bottom line. If someone has done something like this and crossed a certain bottom line, even if they have cultivated for so many years, even if their temperament has changed, I will still feel that this person is worth being wary of. Hearing these words, Zhang Yi and Shen Yi were stunned. They could not connect that kind and amiable old man with the person Xue Wangshu spoke of. You grew up in the marketplace and have seen all kinds of people. You see people more clearly than them. In the future, even if you are the junior sect brother, you have to remind your senior sect brother Zhang Yi. Xue Wangshu looked at Ding Ning and said he was reassured and wanted to motion for Ding Ning to go back and rest. After waving his hand, he thought of something and added, "Ding Ning, I am very satisfied with what you did today to help your senior sect brothers, junior sect brothers, and good friends. Also, tomorrow, find someone to make a wheelchair for me." Zhang Yi shook and said, "Wheelchair?" Xue Wangshu glanced at him and said, "Even with your support, it is too tiring to walk." Ding Ning knew what Xue Wangshu's words meant, but he did not show any sorrow. He nodded and said, "I will have Wang Taishu help me find a more comfortable wheelchair." Time was always the greatest enemy of cultivators. In a situation where there was no way to change it, the only thing they could do was make the limited time more exciting and glorious. As he bid farewell and left the small courtyard, Ding Ning turned and added, "Up until now, the Min Mountain Sword trials have been very successful." Xue Wangshu laughed. His laughter was so happy that his eyes narrowed into a line. "Yes," he said with relief, "just lacking some vital energy." I had not expected you to scheme for so long and learn from Zhou Rongma. When Ding Ning walked into the lightless back courtyard of the wine shop, a familiar cold voice sounded from the bedroom. Ding Ning started to wash up with hot water, as usual. At the same time, he said amidst the splashing water, I just happened to encounter the Zhou family. Also, his fiendish condensing sword can allow me to defeat most opponents in the Min Mountain Sword trials. After a slight pause, he said, Also, I am not you. Even if I dislike someone, if that person's methods are useful to me, I will learn them. I only know that your actions and calculations are different from ordinary people. Zhang Sun Qinshua's cool voice continued to sound. Ordinary people calculate benefits. If they see the fruit, they try to pick the fruit. But you always dig deep. When you see the fruit, you even calculate the benefits of the vine and the roots of the vine. You even want to dig out the roots. Since you saw Zhou Rongma today, and know he is not dead, you naturally will not leave after obtaining such methods from the Zhou family. You are right. You naturally understand me. Ding Ning sneered and said, If he really changed his personality, I would want to spare him. But he has not changed. Also, his vital energy is stagnant. Once he feels there is hope, he will act freely. Before the Min Mountain Sword trials, he will think of ways to scheme against me. I will guide his thoughts to spirit medicines that are useful to me. If everything goes well, his plans will become my wedding dress. Zhang Sun Qinshu also sneered. The little fish schemed against the serpent. Do you not feel you have provoked too many people like this? Ding Ning suddenly laughed and said, I know this is your concern for me. Of course, I know that when fighting people like this, if I make one mistake, I will be killed. So I will be especially careful. Zhang Sun Qinshua's voice was slightly cold. What is the use of being careful? Today, the person from Cloudwater Palace I told you about came to Falling Parasol and specially came here. I think it can only be for you. Ding Ning's movement stiffened, and his brows slowly furrowed. You said you remembered the presence of the person from Cloudwater Palace, Zhang Sun Qinshu said coldly. In Chongling, when have I remembered the presence of a second person from Cloudwater Palace? Ding Ning started to dry his body and change into clean clothes. In this process, he frowned and thought. He had no clue about the matter, but in just a moment, he managed to sort it out and make a possibility. He took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. He said, The person who tried to assassinate me in Fish Market was a true madman. People like that are usually only acquainted with those in the underworld. If the person who tried to assassinate me in Fish Market was sent by Cloudwater Palace, and Cloudwater Palace is able to walk openly in Chongling right now, then the most likely possibility is that Cloudwater Palace is in cahoots with a Chongling dignitary. And this dignitary is likely to be the military dignitary who wants to deal with Two-Level Tower. Zhang Sun Qinshu was most lazy to think about schemes and schemes. But now, Ding Ning spoke very simply. She raised an eyebrow and said to Ding Ning at the door, Liang Lian? I am not certain, but it is most likely him. Ding Ning said, I need to go out immediately. If even Cloudwater Palace wants to act personally, Wang Taishu will be in danger. Zhang Sun Qinshu said coldly, There is no need. While I do not know why Cloudwater Palace has come here, I think that only your relationship with Wang Taishu would summon such a person. So I used your name to tell his people to be careful. Ding Ning's brows immediately relaxed. Wang Taishu's power was completely different from before. He could borrow some of the military's power if he was prepared. Even if Bai Shan Shui came in person, he likely would not be able to find and kill him in Chongling. Help me create a chance to act. Zhang Sun Qinshua's voice reached his ears again. His brows that had just relaxed furrowed again. Do not refuse. Zhang Sun Qianxue looked at Ding Ning and said with slight disdain, "This time, it is not your matter. This is related to the lonely mountain sword hoard, and I was the one who found this person. If it really is Liang Lian and by Shan Shui, this way, they may discover the connection between the Nine Hell King's sword and me. Then our identities will be unavoidably drawn out." Ding Ning was silent for a moment. He could not find any other reason, and could only say this: "Aren't you most skilled in scheming? Maybe in your plan, you have included me in it." Zhang Sun Qianxue looked at him and sneered. "If so, then plan better. Maybe you do not need to use you and Wang Taishu as bait. You can also not let other people find traces of me and him. Even if I want to scheme against you, I want you to leave Chongling. But I cannot change you." Ding Ning looked at her in the darkness and said slowly and gravely, "Previously, you said that I walked too quickly, but after you could suppress the Nine Hell King's sword, you changed. You are not willing to be left out. I only hope that you will not be too fast." Zhang Sun Qianxue glanced at him and used the words he often used to answer, "I will be careful." Chapter 143. It was deep into the night, but the most noble mistress of the Qin dynasty was not asleep. She was still sitting on the phoenix chair in the study. In the spirit spring not far in front of her, the white and flawless lotus flowers had already withered and were beginning to bear several equally white and flawless lotus pods that did not seem to belong to the mortal world. Fu Su wants to attend the Min Mountain Sword Trials. Hearing the report of a palace made below the spirit spring, she said softly, "It's really troublesome." The palace attendant instinctively thought that the empress would not allow it, but when she looked up, she saw the faint smile on the empress' beautiful face. She stilled. He is a youth and cannot endure loneliness. But which of those true heroes has not caused trouble before? The empress said coolly, "If he wants to go, let him go. It is good to learn." The palace attendant made a sound of acknowledgement. She hesitated and said, "The Holy One has sent multiple decrees today." He confirmed that the people accompanying him to the Deer Mountain Conference are Marquis Su, Bureau Chief Huang, Prime Minister Li, and Imperial Prince Hu Hai. Also, the Holy One sent a decree to Fangho Province. He hopes that Fang Xiumu will also come, but his words are gentle, and he did not force it. Prime Minister Li, Hu Hai, and Fang Xiumu? The empress murmured softly to herself. The palace attendant inexplicably felt a layer of coldness. In her view, since Fu Su was the most favored imperial son of the empress and the Holy One, then if the Deer Mountain Conference was to bring an imperial son, it should be Prince Fu Su. Had the Holy One's attitude towards Prince Fu Su changed slightly because of what had happened at the New Year's banquet? According to some rumors in the palace, the Holy One had intended to make Fu Su the crown prince next spring. If the Holy One's mind changed, what kind of storm would there be? To her surprise, an imperceptible smile appeared at the corners of the empress' lips again. She said softly, "This is good." The palace attendant left with misgivings. Inside and outside the imperial palace, there were many people who had the same misgivings as her. The Deer Mountain Conference was related to the conflict between the Qin dynasty, the Chu, Yan, and Qi dynasties. It was a major event compared to the Deer Mountain Conference that was related to the fate of the entire dynasty. The Min Mountain Sword Trials were just a game for the young in the eyes of many important people. Because it was so important, everything related to the Deer Mountain Conference would reflect a lot of information. Those who could accompany him were naturally the emperor's most trusted people. At the same time, they were also important people who held astonishing power in some aspect. Why did you summon Fang Xiumu? On a certain section of the walls of the imperial city of the Qin dynasty, two bigwigs were talking in the dark. Their faces could not be seen clearly in the dark, but one of them had a faint red glow on his face, as if cinnabar was about to seep out of his skin. His face was long and narrow, and vaguely looked like he was in his 40s or 50s. The other person seemed to be in the prime of his life. He was tall and sturdy like an iron tower, and he was like a ferocious beast. Hot chi and blood rose from his body, causing the cold air around him to distort a little. It was as if he was stepping on an extremely hot steamer. Feng Xiumu only knows how to meditate and comprehend the sword. His Majesty naturally did not summon him because he is interesting and can relieve the boredom of the journey. Hearing the words of the bigwig with the faint red glow, the tall person said casually. The person with the faint red glow said coldly, "Has Feng Xiumu become stronger than Yi Xiling and the others after sitting for so many years?" The tall person said, "That is the only possibility." The person with the faint red glow sneered. "Feng Ho province is glorious now, but we are not. How is it not good?" The tall person shook his head and said, "You say that His Majesty did not allow Fu Su to accompany him." The person with the faint red glow said, "Other than this, is there anything else that is worth me coming here to talk to you?" The burly man glanced at him and said bluntly, "You've misunderstood. When His Majesty is outside, what he needs to worry about the most is His Majesty's safety. But with His Majesty's cultivation, what he needs to consider is not his safety after he leaves Chongling, but whether Chongling is stable. Who could cause Chongling to become unstable? His Majesty took Prime Ministerly away. Only Her Highness the Empress has this ability. If he has such concerns and wants to take Fu Su away, everyone knows that the Empress dotes on Fu Su. Even Fu Su stayed behind to accompany the Empress. If the Empress wants to do something, she will not have any misgivings. So His Majesty has arranged this because he absolutely trusts the Empress." The person with the faint red glow was silent for a moment and said, "You have followed His Majesty and the Empress for many years. You see more clearly than I do." The tall person glanced at him and said slowly, "So we just have to wait. Next spring, the Prince Fu Su that the Meng family and your Duanmu family support will be the crown prince." In the morning, because most of the shops were still closed for the new year, falling parasol appeared, even colder. Ding Ning cooked porridge and opened the shop. He originally wanted to ask Shui Wangshu what he wanted to eat today, but he immediately saw a carriage waiting for two youths under the tree in front of the shop. These two youths were about the same age as Ding Ning. One was dressed in a red robe with a white fox collar. The other was dressed in a purple satin robe. The two youths had white faces and tender skin, and had proud expressions. Seeing Ding Ning, the expressions of the two youths changed. The slightly taller youth dressed in the purple satin robe immediately came forward and bowed in greeting. "This one is Zhen Tingan. Greetings, Brother Ding." Ding Ning looked at this youth and returned the greeting. He asked, "So early in the morning, what is the matter?" Zhen Tingan smiled slightly, but his eyebrows rose. He suddenly had an arrogant expression. "The ranking on the Book of Talents has changed." He looked into Ding Ning's eyes and said. Ding Ning frowned slightly and said, "So what?" "You have risen to 61st. Zhen Tingan's smile suddenly disappeared and turned to coldness. His voice quickly turned harsh. "I am now ranked 62nd. I cannot understand how you qualify to be ranked above me, so I came here early in the morning to ask you." Ding Ning said calmly, "If you cannot understand, you can ask Hongyang Academy. They made the Book of Talents, not me." Zhen Tingan said mockingly, "That is too troublesome for me. There are simpler and more direct methods." "You want to challenge me?" Ding Ning shook his head briskly and said, "No." Zhen Tingan stilled and instinctively asked, "Why?" Ding Ning glanced at him and said, "Not interested." Zhen Tingan laughed in anger. Is this a matter of whether you are interested or not? Ding Ning nodded and said, I do not want to waste words. You should leave. Zhen Tingan laughed loudly for a dozen breaths. It would not be good if someone tore down the door in the new year. His gaze landed on the door of the shop behind Ding Ning, and he said disdainfully, Even if I pay for it, I cannot find a craftsman to make up for it. Ding Ning glanced at him and shouted, Senior sect brother Zhang, there is a matter. Come quickly. Zhen Tingan and the youth behind him stilled. They thought, did this common youth not know the rules and wanted to call his senior sect brother to fight? A tall figure rushed out from a small courtyard not far away. Steam rose from his hand as he held a hot towel. Junior sect brother Ding Ning, what is the urgent matter? I am helping Cave Master wash up. Zhang Yi looked with a grimace at Ding Ning and asked. Ding Ning glanced at him and said, Please, senior sect brother and junior sect brother Shun Yi bring Cave Master over. There are things he likes to see. Hearing Ding Ning's words, Zhang Yi stilled. He looked at Zhen Tingan and the other youth with some understanding. Why so early? He said in a low voice, and then turned to fly back. It seems that common people do not have any sense of shame. It will not work if I do not force you. Zhen Tingan smiled in satisfaction and turned to walk towards the carriage. He said, I even brought the unsharpened iron sword. I do not need to borrow it. You will not have any more excuses. Facing Zhen Tingan's arrogant attitude, Ding Ning only waited silently. After a dozen breaths, Zhang Yi and Shun Yi's figures appeared in his sight. The two carried a rattan chair and carried out Shui Wangshu. After settling Shui Wangshu under the nearby eaves, Zhang Yi went into the courtyard to get a thick blanket and a fire basin. Junior sect brother Shun Yi, go get a bigger umbrella. Seeing Zhang Yi put the fire basin in front of Shui Wangshu's feet, Ding Ning said to Shun Yi, What do you need an umbrella for? Zhang Yi was slightly puzzled and looked up at the sky. At this time, the sky was clear and the morning light was shining down. Was there any hint of rain? Zhen Tingan frowned and was about to say something, but at this time Ding Ning looked at him and said calmly, You are not a match for me. Also, my attacks are too powerful, so I will not fight you. Also, you cannot even defeat me, senior sect brother Zhang Yi. Before Zhen Tingan could speak, Ding Ning turned to look at the stunned Zhang Yi and said, Senior sect brother, you fight this round. Are you making fun of me? Or do you really want me to tear down your shop? Zhen Tingan shouted in disbelief. Zhang Yi also looked at Ding Ning and said in disbelief, Junior sect brother, I speak the truth. What if I accidentally stab him to death? Ding Ning looked at him and said, Also 2 people on the genius ranking will have more face than me alone. Is this forcing a duck onto a perch? Shui Wangshu had been slightly dazed, but now he stroked his beard and smiled. He said, But this is also good. Zhang Yi, you have a peaceful personality and need someone to push you. Do not disappoint your junior sect brother's good intentions. Zhang Yi did not dare to refute Shui Wangshu's words. He said hesitantly, Cave Master, is this really good? Enough. Zhen Tingan shouted angrily. Ding Ning, you feel that a person who is not even in the Book of Talents is a match for me? If you do not dare, you can just crawl through my pants. Why do you have to think of so many tricks? Ding Ning's expression was slightly cold. He said scornfully, What, you do not dare? If you can really defeat my senior sect brother, I will wait for you to fight at any time. Why are you shouting here and disturbing my peace? Today, I will first defeat him, and then see if you can hide. Zhen Tingan was furious. He jumped on his foot, and with a hum, an unsharpened iron sword flew towards Zhang Yi. Chapter 144. Blocking the door in the morning, threatening to tear down the door, and kicking the sword to challenge. Zhen Tingan's actions today appeared very arrogant. Yet this was very normal in Chongling. Zhen Tingan was like a miniature of countless Chongling youths. Everything was false reputation. Strength was the most important. When the swordsmen of the Qin dynasty had defeated the Han, Zhao, and Wei dynasties, Chongling had a presence where the sword was the most important. In reality, in the hearts of the nobility, the reason the Yuanwu emperor was able to succeed in his reform and control the entire Qin dynasty after ascending the throne was because he and the people around him had swords that no one else could stop. So many cultivators in Chongling respected Xue Wangshu now, not because Xue Wangshu was old enough, but because of his cultivation. Zhang Yi turned sideways, reached out, and accurately grabbed the hilt of the unsharpened iron sword flying at him. He was familiar with the personalities of the youths of Chongling, so he was not angry. He looked at Ding Ning and said with a frown, "You really want me to fight?" Ding Ning glanced at him and said softly, "Fight more brilliantly, not that I want to watch." Zhang Yi heard the meaning in Ding Ning's words. His worried expression finally disappeared, and he nodded solemnly. "You made a challenge so troublesome. No wonder White Goat Cave could only belong to the Green Vine Sword Academy." Zhen Tingan had lost his patience and said rudely. Then he walked to the center of the path. He raised the unsharpened iron sword in his hand and pointed the blunt tip at Zhang Yi's chest. The blade started to tremble slightly and gave off a roar like waves hitting the shore. Zhang Yi cautiously walked forward quickly, trying to get as far away from Xue Wangshu as possible. At the same time, he shot a look at Shen Yi, indicating for him to take care of Xue Wangshu. If this was an ordinary time, Zhen Tingan would wait for the opponent to hold the sword before attacking. But for him, Zhang Yi was not the opponent he wanted to find. Also, Ding Ning and Zhang Yi were delaying in his eyes. So he attacked directly. The seal scripts on the unsharpened iron sword were quickly filled with blinding vital energy and primal energies of the universe. An indigo sword energy slanted forward as Zhen Tingan moved forward. This sword energy did not slash straight at Zhang Yi's chest, but splashed to the ground like a clear stream and then spread into thin indigo sword energy, like bamboo leaves. Zhen Tingan was a disciple of the Clear Stream Sword School. This attack was the famed sword form of the Clear Stream Sword School, Clear Stream Bamboo Shadow. Zhang Yi hastily swung his unsharpened iron sword in front of him. A slightly curved white sword light, like a curved white goat horn, blocked the thin indigo sword energy that shot upwards like bamboo leaves. But at this time, Zhen Tingan had charged in front of him. A shrill cracking sound covered all the sounds of sword energy clashing. A terrifying power suddenly surged out of the tip of Zhen Tingan's unsharpened sword and stabbed towards Zhang Yi's chest. This was Clear Stream Gushing Spring. Zhang Yi sensed the terrifying momentum of this attack. His expression changed slightly, and he flicked his sword upwards. In this critical moment, his blunt sword accurately stabbed at the tip of Zhen Tingan's sword and caused the power of this attack to pass over his head. A hint of disdain flashed across Zhen Tingan's face. While Zhang Yi had easily resolved the attack, in this moment of contact, he could sense that Zhang Yi's vital energy cultivation was slightly weaker than his. Without any hesitation, the true essence in his body surged out in an even more turbulent manner, pouring into the sword and pressing down. Zhang Yi's body staggered, and he took 3 steps back. The sword light from above split into 2 and continued to advance in front of him. 2 clear and deep sword marks appeared on the stone path in front of him and sprayed out dust. There was a tearing sound. A tear appeared on Zhang Yi's right sleeve. Zhen Tingan's sword move had ended, but the disdain on his face grew. He quickly put his sword away. Once he put his sword away, A vast wave of vital energy suddenly shot out of his body and collided with the vital energy and primal energies of the universe still stored in his sword. This collision was like a blossoming wave, suddenly dragging out countless green lines of water in the air. Zhang Yi's expression grew more serious. His feet were firmly planted on the ground, and he raised the sword in his hand. With another explosion, a slightly curved white sword energy shot up. This was the white goat hanging horn of the white goat sword manual. In this moment, the blue lines of water pulled out true blue water blades and shot forward. The thickest part of the white goat horn blocked these blue water blades like a shield. Zhang Yi did not move, but his body trembled slightly. A tear appeared on each shoulder of his robes, and fine beads of blood flew out. With a boom, the white goat horn disappeared. Zhang Yi took 3 more steps back. "You say you can win against me like this?" Zhen Tingan, who had taken a step back and avoided the remnant sword essence of the white goat hanging horn, pointed his sword at the ground. He looked leisurely and disdainful. Ding Ning frowned slightly, looking at the faint marks of blood on Zhang Yi's shoulders. He said, "Senior sect brother, are you a masochist or an exhibitionist? You will wait until your clothes are torn before you truly attack." Looking at his clothes out of the corner of his eye, Zhang Yi said in embarrassment, "I was afraid that Cave Master would say the time was too short and not exciting enough, and wanted to see if I could win with just the white goat sword manual. I had not expected the opponent to be so strong." Hearing the conversation between the two, clearly not admitting defeat, Zhen Tingan's expression grew darker. He took a deep breath and did not want to speak. He only wanted to completely defeat Zhang Yi with his next blow. He swung his sword forward again. This time, the flow of vital energy in his body was even stronger, as though he was going to spew out all the vital energy in his energy sea at once. However, this crazy surge of true essence carried a unique rhythm. Waves of vital essence at different speeds collided and overlapped with each other on the sword in his hand. The pure, black, unsharpened sword in his hand started to give off blue light until it turned completely blue. Wave after wave of green flames spilled out from his sword. As his sword moved, the sword cut out wondrous paths in the air. Small whirlpools appeared in the layers of blue waves. Every tiny vortex became more and more condensed, turning into the shape of round pebbles. Zhang Yi's expression grew grave again. The Clear Stream Sword Academy had a mystic technique known as the Stream Stone Sword. The clear stream carried thousands of pebbles as it flowed forward rapidly. These thousands of pebbles were like a gigantic grindstone. Even if one could block it for a moment, they would probably be ground to death later on. Zhen Tingan must be using this stream stone sword right now. Feeling the weight of each pebble, Zhang Yi knew he had no other choice. He stabbed with the black iron sword in his hand. However, his sword did not stab forward. Instead, the tip of the sword pointed upwards, piercing towards the sky above. As he stabbed, many paths he had clearly comprehended in Ink Garden appeared in his mind. Waves of sword chi rushed out from the tip of his sword. The clear and faint energy charged into the sky, causing moisture and rain in Ink Garden. At this time, waves of murderous sword energy pierced the sky. What kind of change would it cause? Nothing seemed to have changed. Zhen Tingan's indigo sword light had risen and was flying over. Zhang Yi's eyes flashed with an unusual light. At the same time, his expression was slightly hesitant. Ding Ning looked at him and said calmly, "Do not be wishy-washy. Do you want Cave Master to be angry?" The moment Ding Ning spoke, Zhang Yi felt something was wrong. The sword in his hand that was stabbing towards the sky had already slashed down. At this moment, the aura in the entire alley changed abruptly. Shen Yi, who had been anticipating to the extreme, couldn't help but exclaim, Zhun Tingan's breathing suddenly stopped. He could feel countless sharp wills rapidly descending from the sky above. He unconsciously looked up. He saw countless sparkling and translucent raindrops suddenly appear in the clear sky. It was different from the rain in the past. Each raindrop in these lines of rain was connected together like countless small hammers hitting each other to spread the moisture to the ground as quickly as possible. Sensing the sharpness in the lines of rain, Zhun Tingan's face quickly paled. He let out an unprecedented roar and raised the long sword in his hand. The stream of indigo pebbles surged upwards towards the lines of rain. It was not that he wanted to block, but he could not dodge. The sword essence of Zhang Yi's sword had filled all the alleys around him. He could not reach Zhang Yi. Thousands of lines of rain fell into the alleys. Miraculously, the lines of rain that fell on the eaves on the sides, the trees in the alleys, and the other parts of the street only gave off pure moisture and splashed into water. Only where Zhang Yi's sword was pointing, where Zhun Tingan was, the lines of rain gave off terrifying energies and turned into sharp and unstoppable small swords. Countless dense raindrops pierced into the green waterfall-like stream, rushing out one straight white line after another. The sharp sword essence collided with the small pebbles in the stream and created even finer white flowers. Each small pebble had the unshakable presence of a rock in the water, steady and persistent. Yet these lines of rain were too long and lasted longer. It was just a moment of dawn, but the stalemate was like water dripping through stone. Countless small green pebbles burst open. The stream of water that was surging upwards completely collapsed and dissipated. Zhun Tingan's unsharpened sword was still swinging powerlessly upwards, but countless raindrops had landed on his sword and his body. Zhang Yi had put away his sword, and the presence he gave off was withdrawn. Yet these raindrops had not dissipated. They hit the unsharpened sword and gave off dense clangs. Countless popping sounds came from Zhun Tingan's body. He was unable to stand under the dense impact and fell to the ground. His clothing was pierced with countless small holes, and his skin was covered in small bloody marks. The rain flowed down his skin. His tattered clothing was soaked, and his loose hair was dripping. His body started to uncontrollably tremble in cold and terror. How is this possible? What kind of sword move is this? He looked up weakly at Zhang Yi and asked with his pale lips. Chapter 145. Zhang Yi looked apologetically and awkwardly at Zhun Tingan, who was sitting dazedly in the rain. He did not know how to answer. Even he did not know the name of this move he had comprehended from the painting Remnant Scroll. This move is called Morning Rain, dries the dust. Ding Ning's voice sounded. Zhun Tingan's body shook. As Ding Ning spoke calmly, he saw all the dust on the roof tiles on the withered branches and in the cracks of the stone paths had been washed away. Everything looked brand new. Zhang Yi nodded apologetically at Zhun Tingan again. Then he looked nervously at Ding Ning and asked, "Junior Sect Brother Ding Ning, how was my move?" Ding Ning glanced at him and said emotionally, "Very good." The rain falling from the sky formed lines, and the dampness formed sword essence. This was a thunderous and murderous move. If Ding Ning had been the one to use it, many things in this long alley would have been turned to dust. Zhang Yi was gentle and kind. In his hand, the murderousness of this move had been greatly restrained. As a result, the rain outside was as gentle as the spring rain. Yet this change produced a change that even Ding Ning had not expected. The primal energies of the universe that had gathered in the sky did not tilt with the murderousness, but naturally poured in where his sword essence pointed. So while this move was still too gentle, and the sword essence could not be used to its fullest, the rain covering Zhun Tingan had increased in speed and penetration. So the same sword and sword form had different effects in different people's hands. Hearing Ding Ning's praise, Zhang Yi finally showed a relaxed smile. While Ding Ning was his junior sect brother, he seemed to have stricter demands on him than Shui Wangshu. Also, he had comprehended this sword essence after Ding Ning's reminder. At least, in this move, Ding Ning was his teacher. This was the first time he had used it against an enemy, so he naturally hoped to receive his teacher's approval. Shen Yi held a large umbrella above Shui Wangshu's head. The water droplets that were splashing towards Shui Wangshu were all stopped and flowed down the umbrella. At this time, he finally realized why Ding Ning had him prepare an umbrella from the start. He had not detected that half of his clothing was wet. Looking at the spotless streets, the relaxed smile on Zhang Yi's face, and Shen Yi's half-soaked clothes to block the water droplets for him, Shui Wangshu smiled in satisfaction and said, "Very good." Zhang Yi wanted Shui Wangshu to be happy. Hearing Shui Wangshu's praise, he was truly happy, and his face seemed to glow. "You also know this sword form." Zhen Tingan struggled to stand up from the ground. He looked at Ding Ning with a pale face and asked. While he did not know how Zhang Yi had comprehended this move, he could sense many things from Zhang Yi's expression when he asked Ding Ning. Ding Ning glanced at him and said, "I do not cultivate this sword form, but I cultivate more powerful than this." Zhang Yi feared that Zhen Tingan would not give up and said urgently, "My junior sect brother Ding Ning speaks the truth. If you fight him, I fear you will be seriously injured. So you are not cowardly. You really have the confidence to win." Zhen Tingan's expression changed. After saying this, he turned and walked towards the carriage. But before he got on the carriage, he said softly, "But even if you have absolute confidence in defeating me, it is useless. Someone will come find you. I know someone who does not want you to have a chance to attend the Min Mountain Sword Trials." When Zhang Yi heard this, his expression suddenly changed. He asked anxiously, "Who is it?" But Zhen Tingan did not answer. The carriage carried him and the other youth and sped quickly. Only the sound of hooves echoed in the streets. He does not speak much after being defeated. This Zhen Tingan does not seem like a bored person. Zhang Yi frowned in worry. He turned to look at Ding Ning and said, "He must have heard something." Ding Ning frowned. The appearance of the Cloud Water Palace cultivator and the threat to Wang Taishu, especially Zhang Sun Qianshua's changes after suppressing the 9 Hell King sword, made him feel it was hard to control. Now that there was such a thing, his mood couldn't help but turn sour. "What, you want someone to cripple me before I attend the Min Mountain Sword Trials?" Ding Ning sneered. Regardless of whether it is Li Lingjun or other important people who want to do this for some reason, if they want to do this, they will first pay a painful price. Ding Ning's sneer caused Zhang Yi to inexplicably feel cold. Shui Wangshu looked strangely at Ding Ning. Of course, he did not know that Zhang Sun Qianxue was Ding Ning's greatest weakness. He did not know that Ding Ning was anxious because of Zhang Sun Qianshua's changes, but he was sure that Ding Ning's mood today was very different from usual. Forbearance was something Shui Wangshu was best at, so he coughed softly and prepared to reason with Ding Ning. But at this time, a voice floated from the entrance of the alley. "High cultivation, high skill. Even if you are destined to win, it is useless because in many places, human lives are worthless. Some people can easily find people and use their lives to trade for yours." The speaker was a middle-aged man in gray robes. When Zhang Yi turned his head, this gray-robed man had just come down from a gray carriage. This gray-robed man's features were ordinary, but his hair was completely shaved. There were large tattoos from the top of his head to the back of his head, but it was impossible to see what the tattoos were. He had a presence that was even colder and darker than the officials of the Divinity Bureau. He seemed to give off a musty smell, as though he had not seen the sun for a long time. Or rather, Even the sun seemed to avoid his smell. Ding Ning's sneer had caused Zhang Yi to feel cold. Now, this middle-aged man of unknown origins caused Zhang Yi to feel waves of coldness and fear. This presence was distant and unfamiliar, but in a few breaths, Ding Ning thought of where this presence came from. He took a deep breath. His expression did not change much, but he started to secretly change the flow of energy in his body. He deliberately controlled his heartbeat to be faster than usual. My surname is Xue. My name is Yi, not E as in clothes, but one as in horizontal and vertical. The gray-robed, middle-aged man had no intentions of coming back. His slightly gray eyes reflected Ding Ning's figure. He said coldly, "Ding Ning, I have come here on orders from official Shin to take you to the great floating water prison to help with the case." Almost at the same time, in a dark room, Mo Qinggong, dressed in indigo robes, stood behind a gray-robed official with his hands behind his back. This gray-robed official was unusually tall and thin. Compared to the slightly fat Mo Qinggong, he was like a turret. In front of him, there was a smooth, mirror-like metal bed. On top of the bed, there were all sorts of gleaming knives. Above the mirror-like metal bed, there were some hooks, ropes, and other things hanging. Anyone who saw such a scene would immediately feel that this room was a slaughterhouse or a coroner's examination room. However, on a hook near the wall of this room, there was a body that was constantly wriggling. It was constantly emitting weak but extremely mournful moans. The sound of water came from the wall. This was a torture room, a very ordinary torture room in the great floating water prison. Looking at the figure wriggling like a maggot in the gray shadow in the corner, half of his skin stripped off. Even though he had come to the great floating water prison many times, even though the Divinity Bureau had a place for torture and interrogation, Mo Qinggong was still filled with discomfort. He is already like this. Official Shun, you have spent so much effort on him. What else can he not spit out? Mo Qinggong suppressed his discomfort. Looking at the tall and thin gray-robed official, he asked in a deep voice, "Why did you have official Xue find that wine shop youth to help with the case?" "Because I am very idle." The gray-robed official turned around. His face was thinner and longer than ordinary people, and his eyes were deeply sunken. In a dark place like this, he was not much different from a skeleton. "You should know that very few people are sent here. Since the Holy One has given me a salary, of course I cannot do nothing." Since he had sent one in, he would have to spend the next few months with nothing to do on him. "As long as I dig, I will be able to dig out something useful." He looked expressionlessly at Mo Qinggong and said coldly. Mo Qinggong coughed softly to ease his discomfort. Yet when the figure hanging in the corner heard the words, "several months," he gave off a weak wail worse than a ghost's cry. The gray-robed official was naturally Shin Xian, who was in charge of the great floating water prison. He looked at Mo Qinggong as though he did not hear and said, "In the eyes of the Divinity Bureau, that wine shop youth is not suspicious, but in my view, he is the biggest problem." Mo Qinggong's expression turned cold. He said, "What do you mean?" "When Bureau Chief Yi killed Zhao and I, he was present and helped Wang Taishu gain a foothold. After entering White Goat Cave, he reached profound understanding in half a day, and then his cultivation soared. 3 cultivators like this went to assassinate him, but he did not die, and killed one of them in one move. This is impossible for ordinary people." The gray-robed official looked at Mo Qinggong and said expressionlessly, "Too many coincidences are problematic. Too many impossibilities occurring to one person are also problematic. Do not tell me that the Divinity Bureau has investigated thoroughly, and do not tell me that Fang Xiumu feels he is not suspicious." He lowered his eyes and started to show a coldness that even Mo Qinggong felt his heart tremble. When the great floating water prison handles cases, all bureaus must cooperate. You should know that I have many methods that you do not. Only when I see no problem will I feel there is no problem. Chapter 146. Ding Ning exchanged a few words with Zhang Yi and Shun Yi, and then walked onto the gray carriage that seemed to give off a musty smell. The old horses knew the way and did not need people to drive them. The two old horses pulled the carriage and slowly moved through the streets of Chongling. Inside the carriage, Shui Yi sat with his back facing Ding Ning. Ding Ning saw the tattoo on his green scalp. That should be Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. He held a pearl in his left hand and a staff in his right as he sat on a lotus throne. The entire tattoo was multicolored. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's face was benevolent and compassionate, but this color and compassion clashed with Shui Yi's presence and made people feel even more uncomfortable. The curtains of this carriage were not sealed. As the carriage shook, the curtains swayed, and much of the coldness seeped in. Sitting in the innermost part of the carriage, Ding Ning pulled his collar tighter. He looked at the two brown old horses through the gap created by the swaying curtains and tried to find a conversation. These two old horses are very obedient. Sitting in front of him, Shui Yi said coldly, "The disobedient ones have been killed. After killing so many, there will be some obedient ones left behind. Animals are much easier to discipline than people. For animals, death is their greatest fear, but people are different. Some people can risk their lives to do things they think are worth it." Ding Ning's expression did not change, but he made his heart beat faster. He said, "I have never interacted with official before. I do not know why official warned me at the start." Shui Yi did not turn around. He shook his head and said, "Do not have any illusions. I am just casually teaching you a lesson. Every young cultivator of Chongling is a valuable treasure of the Qin dynasty." Ding Ning grew silent and did not speak. Shui Yi also did not speak and allowed the old horses to pull the carriage forward. After half a day, the carriage finally entered the outskirts of Chongling and the deathly stillness of the poplar forest. When they approached the low stone house built along the river, Shui Yi spoke again. "When we enter the prison, you have to follow my footsteps. If you take a wrong step, you may die." Ding Ning's expression turned serious, but he still did not speak. He nodded to show that he had heard clearly. Shui Yi sneered softly. He only showed a bit of his presence, but the two tired old horses suddenly sank into great terror and started to gallop. Moments later, they crossed hundreds of feet of flat ground and faced a stone room that did not even have a door. It looked like they were going to crash into the stone wall and die. However, in front of the fierce wind brought about by the carriage, the stone wall suddenly twisted and turned into an overlapping shadow. The wildly galloping carriage passed through the wall, suddenly plunging into a thick chill. The light on both sides quickly dimmed, and the sound of water splashing under the hooves of the horses continued. Behind this illusory stone wall formed by Yuan Qi was actually a flat passage. It was just that there were no windows on either side of the stone wall, and it was pitch black. Moreover, there was a layer of water at least 2 feet deep on the road. This was the water shadow path, the only passage into the great floating water prison. There were at least 5 kinds of powerful formations under the shallow water layer. When Ding Ning's mental power swept across, there were more than 5 kinds of murderousness under the water layer. Feeling the coldness in the unfrozen water that was even colder than ice, and thinking of the person locked in the deepest part of the water prison being in such bone-chilling water, Ding Ning stopped controlling his heartbeat and blood flow, and allowed his body to tremble slightly. With a splash, a patch of water splashed onto the ground. The carriage finally reached dry land. It was called dry land, but in reality, it was unspeakably dark and damp. There was a moldy smell coming from the cracks in the stone. After the two old horses set foot on the dry ground, they stopped moving, their bodies trembling uncontrollably. Someone was waiting like a ghost at the side, leading the two old horses away. Only Shui and Ding Ning were left on the carriage. Shui turned and looked coldly at Ding Ning. Understanding his meaning, Ding Ning walked behind him. Shui started to walk, his long gray boots leaving behind indistinct footprints on the ground. Ding Ning walked in his footprints. The great floating water prison was the most heavily guarded place in the Qin dynasty. Even someone like Mo Qinggong could only enter with the permission of the person in charge of the great floating water prison. In the imaginations of countless people, the great floating water prison was a chain of iron prisons soaked in cold water. Yet the reality was not so. At this time, in front of Shui and Ding Ning, there seemed to be an enormous valley. In the dark valley, there were many black rocks that were as huge as palaces, standing tall. This kind of valley and palace-sized rocks were not illusions created by formations, but real. But these rocks all faintly gave off the murderousness of formations. Shui led Ding Ning through the thick shadows under the black rocks, passing through this seemingly peaceful underground valley. Passing through this valley, gray mist started to spread ahead. They could not see the path inside, and what it was like, it was as though there were wild beasts in the gray mist that would charge out at any time. Shui meandered through the gray mist. The path twisted upwards like he was climbing a mountain. After a few minutes, the light of some lanterns appeared in the faint gray mist. Below the lanterns was a patch of cherry blossom forest. The cherry blossoms were the kind of deep purple cherry blossoms. The cherry blossom forest was unbelievably blooming in such an underground environment where there was no sunlight at all. The dense and gorgeous purple color seemed to have seeped into the lanterns hanging in the forest. Even the flames emitted by the lanterns had turned into a faint purple color. Ding Ning's breathing paused slightly, and his brow uncontrollably furrowed. He was not faking it out of shock, but true nervousness. He had not expected that Shui would lead him through here today. And this place was truly dangerous for him. Shui stepped into the purple cherry blossom forest. Ding Ning stepped on his footprints. With this step, all the petals on the surrounding cherry blossom trees left their branches and danced around him and Shui. This was a stunning scene that could not be described with words. Countless petals danced in the air, giving off bright light. Yet, for Ding Ning, this beautiful scene contained countless dangerous lines. Just like Zhang Yi and the others in front of the painting remnant scroll, if his mind unconsciously followed any line, these dancing purple cherry blossom petals would naturally give off special presences. Right now, as he walked through the rain of flowers, he couldn't help but look. However, these lines were extremely familiar to him. He had to look at these lines and not touch them at all, as if he couldn't see or sense them. Even for him, this was extremely difficult. When his mind was slowly pulled, and he felt terror rise in his heart, and sweat was about to beat on his back, Zhang Sun Qianshua's face appeared in Ding Ning's mind. I want to safely pass through here. I cannot let her stay in Changling alone. I must pass through here. These 3 sentences sounded in Ding Ning's mind. Then, just like when he was cultivating at night, a heavy snowstorm swept through his heart. His state of mind became absolutely cold and calm once again. Blood walked at the front. When he stepped out of the cherry blossom forest, all the purple petals in the air flew back to the branches like butterflies. The purple wild cherry blossom forest looked as bright as before and had not changed at all. Ding Ning looked back. Looking at this patch of wild cherry blossom forest, he said coldly inside, Zhang Sun Qianxue is my greatest weakness, but she is also my greatest meaning in Changling. Blood continued to move forward. They passed through a stone path that seemed to be two abysses on both sides, and finally stopped in front of a grave-like stone room. He turned to Ding Ning and said coolly, "We are here." After saying this, Blood One silently retreated, leaving only Ding Ning standing in front of the stone room. Ding Ning carefully controlled the flow of energy in his body so that his heartbeat sped up. "Come in." A voice that seemed to come from a high place came from the stone room in front of him. Because it was too high, it was too cold. Ding Ning seemed to hesitate and did not dare to move. "Come in. Since official Shen has allowed you to come in, there will naturally be no danger here," a voice that Ding Ning was familiar with said. Ding Ning's eyes lit up slightly. "Official, Enmo." Then he did not hesitate, and quickly walked into the stone room in front of him. The tall and thin Shen Xian looked coldly at Ding Ning, who walked in from the door. "Sit." He pointed at an iron chair in front of him and motioned for Ding Ning to sit. Ding Ning glanced at Emo Qinggong next to him. Without a word, he sat down on the cold iron chair. Shen Xian reached out. He was too tall and thin. His hands were much longer than ordinary people, so when he reached out, his hand landed on Ding Ning's head. Ding Ning could not avoid it even if he saw it. His fingers tightened slightly. His power penetrated between the flesh and bones of Ding Ning's head, and then relaxed. A hint of undisguised regret and melancholy flashed through his brow. In the history of the Yuanwu Emperor's ascension, he had been one of the people who had been decisive. Later on, he had taken charge of the great floating water prison. In the eyes of most of the Changling nobility, he had either caused the Yuanwu Emperor's displeasure in some matters, or the Yuanwu Emperor did not like to use people who had betrayed others. Yet only he knew that he had not come to the great floating water prison because of demotion, but because of his own request, because this was related to his cultivation. Where else in the world would there be as many powerful cultivators as the great floating water prison? Where would there be so many living cultivators' bodies for him to dissect and study? What's more, these people would spit out a lot of cultivation methods and experiences. So this great floating water reservoir was an enormous treasure trove. Because he had chosen this path, in the first year of Yuanwu, his cultivation had not been as strong as Yixiling or the marquises of Changling, but now he was stronger than many of them. Everything was false. Only strength mattered. Strength was status, compared to vital energy and presence. A cultivator's flesh, blood, and bones could not be faked. With just a touch, he would be able to sense the strength of the other party's flesh and blood, as well as the degree of old and new of the bones. Bone age was the true age. When he had noticed Ding Ning's existence and thought of the wine shop youth's astounding rise, he had an astounding thought, or even hope. If this wine shop youth was that person's heir, then his cultivation speed, comprehension, and fighting ability were all normal. If this was the case, if he could get something from this wine shop youth, then his strength and status in Changling would be even greater. But to his regret and disappointment, this youth did not have any problems today. All of these reactions, even if it was true age, were absolutely impossible, because this wine shop youth should have been born 3 years after that person's death. How could he have any connection to that person? He could not have received that person's personal inheritance and some of that person's experiences. Because he was too regretful and disappointed, his mood was bleak. You're tuning into the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.